exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. This is the word of the Lord. You guys can take a seats. My name's Sean. If I don't know you, I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to be talking about eldering and good pastoring looks like. Nothing says good pastoring like making people wait out in the rain, so I apologize once again. The first service going long. Two things for you to be aware of. Number one is our Seasoned Saints ministry, which I'm not going to give the description, as I said before, for the age, is having their first gathering tonight in the Fellowship Lounge at 5 o'clock here at Glendale. So the two doors down where we have coffee and donuts, all that stuff. In there is also the Advent tree for prison fellowship and all that. But they're going to be gathering in there. So if that is, I don't know, if you're in that age group, I guess, whatever that age group may be, and that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to come check that out tonight at 5. And then the second thing, the other thing is going into the Advent season starting next week, our worship team has put together a playlist for you to be able to listen to kind of prepare your hearts. The songs that have been selected have been intentionally selected as we're going to go through certain narratives in the Old Testament into the New Testament based on the sermons. And so you can actually scan the QR code there, and that will send you to the playlist on Spotify, and that will help you kind of navigate in the Advent season the songs that we're going to be singing. Some are new, obviously. Some are classic Christmas songs within the church, and so hopefully you can find your way to that. All right, let me pray, and then we're going to jump in. We've got 5 verses to cover, but they are full 5 verses, and they're kind of tricky for us because they're addressing leadership, the highest form of leadership in the church, the elders, and yet at the same time we're kind of listening in on that as a congregation. I don't think Peter said, hey, let me talk to everyone else, and then this part of the letter only read to the elders. Everyone would have heard this, and so I think it's important for all of us to hear it as well. But first, let's pray, and then we'll get after it. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to look at your word. We're grateful for it. We do pray, God, that you would be with us now. Holy Spirit, please illuminate the text in the same way you inspired it. Let us see it accurately. Let us respond accordingly. Please grow us in our faith through it according to Romans 10:17. Use it as a discerner of our innermost thoughts according to Hebrews 4:12. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. You have to give me grace this morning. I'm coming off of sickness, so I feel like I can't think very fast. It's driving me crazy. Verse 1 starts with this introduction, and it's an introduction of who Peter is and why he feels he can kind of speak to the eldering process. And it starts with that word "so" there. If you're looking at your Bible, we're going to do a big Bible study together if you're new. So on the heels of talking about suffering, there's going to need to be some leadership in place. So elders, in response to what's going on, here's what he says: I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. So he gives himself kind of 3 descriptions. 1, he's a fellow elder. 2, he's a witness of the sufferings of Christ. And 3, he's also a partaker of glory. As a fellow elder, I think it's important. He could pull on his apostleship here, but he doesn't. He describes himself as a fellow elder. A fellow elder, not just the elder, like some kind of pope figure, but a fellow elder, like all of you elders. He's one of many. And I used to say every single Sunday for the first 3 years at Pella, I would get up every Sunday and say, Pella Communities is a elder-governed, pastoral-led, member-regulated congregation. I was speaking to our polity, our ecclesiology, how we operate. And how we operate is Sean gets 1 vote. I can't, remove an elder if he disagrees with that 1 vote. I wish I could, but I can't, okay? Right? So there's this idea that getting 1 vote, and I'm amongst fellow elders. Peter's speaking to that as well. The second thing is he's a witness of the sufferings of Christ, which of all people, Peter should probably not bring up the fact that he's a witness of the sufferings of Christ, though it doubles down on his apostleship. His narrative is really the hardest to watch, right? Him being a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as he kind of did it from afar out of fear, but I'm glad he brings it up here. And then third thing is he's a partaker as well, the partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. That word partaker is tricky here. This statement could mean 2 things. One is he's already partook of the glory in some sense on the mountain transfiguration that is going to be seen and revealed to everyone else, or like everyone else, he's a partaker of the glory that will be revealed in the same way. No hill I'm dying on here, but it could be either one. Now, that being said, that's kind of an introduction for who Peter is as he goes into talking about elderings. Where we'll spend most of our time is verses 2 and 3. Now, I want you to look at verses 2 and 3 and kind of see how they're put together. So the first statement there, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, is the only imperative in our passage. It's the only command. He's talking to elders, and he tells them they need to shepherd the flock. After that, there are 4 what are called participles, 4 ways in how you're to shepherd the flock. Of the 4, one of them is just a direct statement, exercising oversight. And then the other 3 are these kind of not this, but this, okay? So here's the command. How do you do the command? This. Don't do this, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, do this. That's kind of the format in which we're going to go through. So let's first start with shepherd the flock of God that is among you. There's the command. Now, this is a kind of a play on words because both shepherd and flock are the same root word in Greek. So he's quite literally saying shepherd the sheep, okay? But I want to focus on, if I could, just for a second, the 2 words that you might skip over, which are among you, all right? Among Us obviously being the game. I have no idea if people even still play it, but among you is key here. And let me tell you why. And some of it might honestly just be for a personal conviction for the moment, for myself, or the elders, or even some of you in the room. Just acknowledging that we live in a really, really weird time. And that's true in general, as we'll all have AI robots in our houses in about a year. But beyond that, it's a weird time in the church. I mean, what media has done via YouTube or social media has allowed this weird space for pastors to have, you know, we can have a guy who has 100,000 views on one of his sermons, and yet his congregation could be 400 people. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. What I am saying is it's worth acknowledging that it creates kind of a goofy moment that there could be one of 2 things that take place. Here's one on one side. On one side, there's this pressure of pastors to not just pastor the people that are among them, but to pastor their following as well. And that becomes real tricky because I see it. Just like you in your job and vocation sometimes find yourself in circles or meetings with people who are also in that job and vocation. That's what happens to me as a pastor. So whether that be church planning assessments or pastor gatherings or people just reaching out, young guys reaching out to see if Pella can financially support them or they can use our space or whatever it is, inevitably, there kind of comes to the conversation of heart-level discussion. And what I see with some of these guys is there's this weird pressure, again, not just to shepherd the flock that will be among them or is among them, but the following. And so there's almost like this need within them to have a social media platform, some kind of YouTube presence. They need to get out there, cast vision out there. And again, I'm not saying that's inherently bad. What I am saying, though, is Peter's starting with this idea that the flock of God is very large. I want you to focus on who's around you, who's among you, who is your congregation, the sheep that are part of your flock. This is who he's talking to. And this creates another problem for the sheep as well, though, this moment, right? Because what you can have is you can have a sheep watching a shepherd on a screen who's not part of a flock. There's no church discipline. There's no membership. And it's a disconnection of the moments. And so I just want to acknowledge that Peter kind of starts with this idea that we are, as shepherds, as elders, to focus here. Here. This is where we're to focus. Pella Communities is who we need to focus on as the elders of Pella Communities. And I'll say, just as a side note, this has definitely created tension amongst our media teams over the last 5 years. It's no surprise to many of you that our social media is just not good over the last 5 years. It just hasn't been very good. It's been inconsistent. And to be honest with you, it's not the media team's fault. It's mostly my fault. Because every time there's a new idea to do something in social media, I tend to push back. And I'm not saying I'm right. This could just be my own baggage. But I really want to know why. What are we trying to accomplish? Who is this video for? Right? Like what are we trying to do with all of this? And so there's a sense that our heart, even as elders here at Pella, is to understand, I get it, Pella's growing, and you may feel like at times, man, I need some more time with the elders, and we've only got 5 elders, so we're trying to continue to figure that out. But the reality is, I want you to know our focus is here. And this is what Peter is saying. Focus on shepherd the flock that is among you. That's where I want you to focus. And I think that's beautiful. Even if you could, look at verses 12 through 14. I won't read them, but just it's the end of the book, end of our chapter, and the end of the letter as a whole. And I just want you to notice Peter does what Paul does, what John does. We see this continually, right? At the end of these books, you see Silvanus. He's another name for him. You might know him as Silas. He's mentioned in 1 Corinthians, Thessalonians 3 or 4 times in the book of Acts. He mentions here Timothy. He calls him not Timothy, Mark. He calls him a son. Some of you guys wonder, who's this she who sits in, who is in Babylon? I don't think this is actually the people in the city of Babylon. This is the church that is in Rome, I would contend. My point being is, Peter's talking to real people. So when we talk about shepherding the flock among you, these are real people. And I think that matters, so consider that for whatever it is. And when Philippians is written, Paul is writing to the jailer who he brought to faith, Lydia, who came to faith. He knows the Macedonian people. He knows the house that they're meeting in. All that stuff matters. And maybe that's too much on that one moment, but as John Wesley said, the world is my parish. No, it's not. Your parish is your parish, elders, and that's important for us to know. Now, that being said, let's get to the imperative itself and how to live it out. He says, so shepherd the flock that is among you. How do we shepherd this flock? As I said, he gives you 4 ways as elders, us 4 ways to do this. The first one is exercising oversights. Now, presbyteritas is the word for elder. The word for oversights, you can hear it as episkopos. You can hear Episcopalian in it. It's where we get our word bishop from. Now, just so you know, I would contend, as most would, 4 words that are pretty kind of used interchangeably are elder, pastor, shepherd, and bishop, right? Which is why I'm contending that I would be called Bishop Myers, but it hasn't passed yet, okay? Now, the reason that matters is, as when you see this first exercising oversight, he's using the language of oversight to be synonymous with the word of shepherding. Now, here's why this is important. In a second, we're going to get to the whole bowling thing that all of us are kind of aware of. Podcast has been made about that someone was hurt by an elder who's over-aggressive and he leads bullishly. And we'll acknowledge that. We're going to get to it in a second, but that's not where Peter starts. Peter starts first and foremost with the absence of leadership is not a good thing. Just because there's bad eldering out there, the response is not no eldering. The response is good eldering. That's what we need. And so as much damage might have been done with bullish pastors at some point, which there has been plenty of it, I would contend just as much, if not more, has been done by sheepish pastors who have not led well. One of the things that I've noticed as a dad, now having 5 children, is when my kids were younger, they wanted me to play in the games with them, not just because I'm their dad or I'd look silly or whatever, and I wouldn't let them win, but we would play these games. Is dad kept rules? Dad made sure that the older, we'll call them 2 sons and 2 girls, we'll just throw that out there as an example. The 2 older boys wouldn't kind of take advantage of the 2 younger girls in the game that they're playing. The dad got to kind of keep the rules as he plays, and I think in some ways, this is why eldering matters. The word here with oversight is to look for concern. It's one word in Greek. And I was trying to think of a word that in English we would have that's one word. And it was like babysit, that doesn't work, right? Watch, that's not. There's some kind of version of authority that there. I don't know what it looks like, but the idea is to look intently at. It's a good thing that the elders have insight into your life. It is a good thing. In Acts chapter 20, Paul is talking to the Ephesian elders. Listen to some of the things that he brings out because I think they're worth acknowledging here. He tells them to pay careful attention to the flock, to guard the doctrine, to be alert, to not shrink back from declaring what is good. It is good that the authority, the eldering that is in place does this amongst the sheep. Now, that being said, what does it look like for the other side of this? And Peter acknowledges this. So there are 3 knots into buts. Here it is. The first one, now Calvin describes this as sloth, greed, and a lust for power. Okay? So here's the first one. Not under compulsion, but willingly, as God. Elijah, I promise I got a mic and I'm louder than you. I promise! Oh, that's great. I don't know if you noticed, my wife is pregnant right now. We're 40 years old and we're pregnant. And so we're going to be going into that phase. Yep. Starting 18 years over. Let's get it. I love children. I'm grateful for life, but starting 18 years over. We're getting it. All right. Not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you. This is actually where Paul starts with Timothy in 1 Timothy 3 as well. Let me just kind of say this. I can speak to what's going on, not under compulsion. Eldering for sure is hard at times. There's no doubt. There's meetings you go into that are really, really difficult. There's bedside moments that are really, really difficult. There's discussion and topics that you're just like, man, I thought we've talked about this 1,000 times. I don't want to do this again. I don't want to go to this elders meeting. That's just part of it. That being said, there should never be a mantra of an elder for their life that is one of obligation. And I think that's what this passage is saying. Not under compulsion or have to, but willingly. I think somebody who exudes this really, really well in our congregation is Al Macklin. You're not going to hear our elders complain, but you're definitely not going to hear Al complain. If you know Al, on Monday night we had this night of where we were talking about through evolution and all that stuff, and the burgers were coming out ungodly slow. And you know who didn't get to go to the night of evolution? Al Macklin. And he's not going to complain about it, but he made sure that everyone got fed. And he does this all the time, from making hot dogs to just being the last to eat in whatever environment he's in. He tends to be a servant first and foremost. Recently hearing about Peter even having cancer come back. Lance is on his way home, and it was not a hassle to Lance, though it is a hassle to Lance. He did not treat it like a hassle to make sure on his way home he stops at the hospital, though it's out of the way, to almost beat Heidi to the counter there to check Peter in. He did not complain about that, understanding that this is part of our job, that Peter wants to communicate. It's not under compulsion here, but you can see this part, but willingly, here it is, as God would have you. This is a real important part for elders and future elders to understand, as God would have you in this position because he's called you there. He will supply this. And I don't think there should be this mantra of I have to, or there's this obligation. I think Peter wants to address that. Okay, the second thing as a participle is not for shameful gain, but eagerly. This is where Calvin describes this as greed. Now, I don't think Peter has anything against being paid, okay? In 1 Corinthians 9, he makes that clear. Even on our elder board, we have 5 elders. Myself and Al are paid elders. The other 3 are lay elders. All of us have the same authority. There's no difference there. I don't think that's any confusion there. The word that is needs to be stressed here is not for shameful gain. That's the tricky part here. In Acts 20, verse 23, it says, I coveted no one's silver, gold, or apparel. Now, I actually don't need to parse this out, do I? We have had enough church history, especially if you're not a believer in here. This seems to be something you always want to focus on when it comes to the church, but let's acknowledge it, there are shepherds who are only using the sheep for shameful gain. I remember in my early years of Christianity, our pastor told us as a staff that if we ever have a need and we're preaching, just mention that need in passing and someone will get it for you. Oh, my iPad broke last week and someone will buy that for you. And at the time I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Now I hear it and I go, that's a terrible idea, right? Because there's a sense of you can leverage the moment, you can leverage your leadership, you can leverage the authority, the care, and there's almost like this, well man, I know they do so much, I owe them so much, and then I therefore should give, and that can be taken advantage of. On a side note, let me say this. Pella is wildly generous. Like, you are absolutely, as a congregation, Tim's not in the service, so I can kind of throw out any numbers. If they're true or not, I don't know. But looking at what I do know, like, we're above and beyond what is average giving when it comes to per person. I would say, like, if I die tomorrow, I'm not just saying this because of the text, I'm not concerned that my family would be taken care of. I know Pella would take care of my family. I know that there is a care of this. And so the good news is at Pella, there's not a need for this because of just your generosity. There's never a need for myself or any elders to take advantage of this. And I've seen it, for sure. And some of you have seen it firsthand. There have been many moments, even not pastors, not shepherds, but televangelists who do take advantage of the sheep. And of course, it's not right. And the answer is there, but eagerly, not to do this so that I can get what I want, but I eagerly want to just serve. I want to be able to just give my life away as shepherds give our life away. And I think that's a beautiful part of this. I'll say this, I mentioned Tim, but man, I do think of Tim Tobey when I see this part of verse 2. Not just because he is our CFO, but if you know anything, as I mentioned about the Tobeys, how much they give. You guys, how many times Tim has been burned and having people live with them and him care for them, and then they just burn the Tobeys. How often he gives and not even worries about how he's going to retire, but they give and they give and they give, and you would never know his needs. He just is that kind of guy, and I'm grateful that he exudes that for us as a congregation. Not me, though. I need a new truck, I think is what I need. Verse 3. Actually, I got a really cool old farm truck, so I'm good. Verse 3 says this, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. Now, this one, in my opinion, is the trickiest because let me tell you how eldering works, how someone becomes an elder. A member recommends, or what can I think of the word? Nominates, thank you. Nominates a potential elder. Then that comes to the elder. Now, my job amongst the other elders is to go to that nominee and ask them, hey, you've been nominated. Do you want to enter into the process of that? if the other elders are good with it, right? There might be something, as somebody might be nominated, that the elders are aware of, that we would say that nomination isn't going to go through. But if the elders go, okay, yeah, we can put him in this nomination phase and move him into this space, I have to go to that man and say, do you want to become an elder? Would you like to go through that process? Nothing's promised, but do you want to go through the process? Now, this is tricky because on one side, he should want to. I mean, this is very good. He should desire this position. It's a good thing to desire it, as Paul tells Timothy. And yet, the question, it's so tricky, why does he desire it? That's a goofy thing. And not domineering over those who are in your charge is why we've got to be careful of this, because there are those who would seek leadership for the sake of leadership, for the sake of a platform. And we have a word for, or two words, or a phrase for this. They're power hungry. They like being in positions of leadership to tell people what to do. And a domineering person does this in all of the wrong ways. Now, I could give you examples in our own state of men who do this, just absolute wolves and clowns who call themselves pastors. But for the sake of on the other side, can I just bring up in our own congregation to worry about who's among us? I think of Brandon Southall when I think of verse 3. If you know Brandon Southall, you love Brandon Southall. I can't tell you how many people have come from Northwest just because of Brandon Southall. He has never fought for a position of authority. When he shepherds our congregation and pastors our congregation, it's always from a place of wooing people into that place and not being domineering. He's always walking alongside in relationship. He's always caring in this. And I think this is why, but being an example to the flock is so important, because I think Brandon exudes this really, really well. And I'll say this, one advantage of Pella's culture, and there's a lot of things wrong with Pella, I get it. Our elders are not perfect, we're not perfect. But one thing I do love is guys like this, the domineering type, don't last long in Pella. And I don't know why, but there seems to be men who want to come along and be in that position, or men or women who want to be in those positions, and the elders will not allow them. And I think it's because of the culture that guys like Brandon bring. We just don't take that. That's not something that goes on. It might be because my natural propensity is to be that kind of leader, and the elders are just tired of it, right? So maybe that's the case. But regardless, that we are to be examples of what it looks like to live this thing out. I think this is clutch here for the original context. The original context is a context of suffering. And I think right now, even though media is doing a bunch of disservice to us, one of the cool things is we've got a front row seat to watch the churches who are going in persecution, specifically China. And when you watch like a church in early reign, you know the first people who are picked up and put in prison? It's always the pastors. It's the leadership. They are quite literally being an example of what it looks like to go under this kind of persecution. And I think that should be true for all elders. Now, can I just say this about verse 3? The word does not appear in verse 3, but I was trying to think through what exactly does that mean, to not be domineering or but be an example. The word that comes to mind, the way that I would understand verse 3, is the word humility. Elders should exude humility. I get it, it's not in the text, but there needs to be a sense from an elder that he takes God serious, but not himself serious. There needs to be a sense that he doesn't know everything. And there's moments where he can say, I'm not quite sure. I was reading a book by a guy named Timothy Whitmer. It's called The Shepherd Leader. And he gives an example. He's now a retired pastor, but he says early in his pastorate, he had an intern who had just got married, who was on his way. He was hoping he could be a pastor one day and all that stuff. And he eventually did become a pastor in his ministry. But they had a 4 or 5 year rotation of classes. And so this guy came to him as the pastor and said, I'd like to teach a class on parenting. The problem is he'd been married a little less than a year and he had no children and he wanted to teach his class on parenting. So Whitmer says, I let him do it. And so he taught this class on parenting, and the title of the class was 10 Commandments for Parents, okay? And so the time came around, they had their first 1 or 2 children, and he said, hey, would you like to teach that class on parenting again, right? So he taught the class on parenting again, and the class was titled 5 Principles for Parenting. And so 5 years later, they had 5 children, and he said, hey, would you like to teach that class again? And you can read it, how he tells the story. It's hilarious. He said the title of the class was A Few Suggestions for Parents, okay? Now, I think that matters. I think that was a perfect example of understanding an elder in a position. The reason they can't be a new convert is there's a sense that they've lived enough life that early on in ministry, you guys, I felt like everything was so clean. You have to give in church planning environments things that are called perspectives. And you have to give this thing that kind of explains, here's what we do. Membership is this. This is what it is. And everything was so clean. And then I started actually pastoring people, right? And all the all that stuff begins to flesh itself. And I'm not saying live in ambiguity, but things were not as clean as I made them. And I think a good elder is not forcing his way in there. This is what happens, but understanding we're in this process and we're walking alongside people. And I think humility matters when it comes to a good elder. This leads us to verse 4. So that's how you are to shepherd the flock. Now here's what it says. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. I want to work on the back part of verse 4 first. That unfading crown of glory, you might think of like an actual metal crown. That's not what's being described here. It's the word wreath, actually. Think of like the Olympics. And it's an unfading crown because they would have like live, you'd put like a flower that was just picked in these wreaths. Well, eventually that wreath is going to, it's going to disintegrate, right? It's going to wither and all that stuff. But this wreath that you're going to receive it's unfading. And that's why the language is used here. I'll just say this, I'm striving for that. Full disclosure, I think the other elders are striving for that. The hope is at the end of my life, I can receive an unfading crown of glory based on eldering well. You can ask my wife, there's days I come home and I go, I was just faithful today and I'm so thankful. Like I didn't want to go to some of those meetings. I didn't want to go to, but I did. And I'm just thankful that I did. And so that's that first part, that's the second part of verse 4. But it's the first part we're going to focus on for a second. Because here's what he says, and when the chief shepherd appears. Now, if you can, go back to verse 2 for a second. I want you to look at the command that was given again, because as we said, it's shepherd the flock of God among you. Now, we've already talked about shepherd the sheep. We've already talked about among you. But I want you to notice that it's shepherd the flock of God. Now, the obvious is that the flock ultimately belongs to God. But let me kind of paint why or how this might work. Imagine all of us own a few acres and we're just kind of sharing. We're out in kind of a rural area. And I've got a flock that is about 30 sheep. And one day my flock ends up in your field. So you come up and go, hey, whose flock is this? Now my response would be, these are my sheep. That's my flock. I apologize. I'll bring them back over to my side of the boundary line. But imagine for a second what we call in a modern day a hired hand. Back then, there's an archaic term called a flock keeper. That is, because that day I couldn't take the flock out, so they take the flock out and they end up again on your land. And that guy asks again, hey, whose flock is this? Right? Who do these sheep belong to? The flock keeper would respond, the hired hand would respond with, these are Sean Myers' sheep. This flock belongs to Sean Myers. Now, everything I just said is no duh. Well, in talking about this, what we kind of just skipped over in the command is, though God's flock is very large, the flock ultimately belongs to God. And there's a part of that flock that now you are a flock keeper. As an elder, you are a hired hand. Now that sounds, it's not great language, so give me grace in saying that, but you are a temporary entity that is needed right now to just take care of these sheep in this place at this time. But the reality is there is a ruling, that's the word chief comes from, ark, this ruling shepherd that is ultimately over. Now, five things. Number one is, this means that every elder is as I said, simply a flock keeper, not the ultimate shepherd of the people of Pella, that us as elders for this moment in time get to oversee. Number two, it doesn't say it in the text, but if you're not aware, the chief shepherd that is going to appear is Jesus. This is according to John chapter 10 as well. Number three is every shepherd is a sheep then, if this is true. That even as a shepherd now, I understand that I am part of the flock of God because I am under the chief shepherd. Number four, some of you have had really bad bags in receiving bad shepherds at times in your life. And I just want to acknowledge, though that may be true, you have someone who is an ultimate shepherd over your soul who cares far more than that man did. I pray that's not the situation here at Pella. And then finally, I think what is true when the chief shepherd appears is those elders will have to ultimately answer to the ruling elder, the chief shepherd. That the 5 elders here at Pella will have to give a response to the chief shepherd. Now, you can, if you want, you can dive into 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. There's a ton of other things, a list of how elders' children should be, from how they host people to their disposition towards different things like money or alcohol, all that kind of stuff. I'll let you read that if you want to look up 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. I'm not going to do that now because I want to look at the first half of verse 5 to finish our time together. And I'm only going to do the first half as I explained last week why. I think the second half of verse 5 went with our passage last week. It says this, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. So it switches now from the elders' role to now your role with the elders. Now, you go, but it says to those who are younger, I thought everybody has to be subject to the elders. Yes, that is true. Why does he bring up those who are younger? And honestly, just kind of use common sense for a second. Just two things immediately come to mind that I think are really helpful here. Number one is younger people are usually most in need of wisdom, right? Talking to someone who is 19 years old versus someone who is 70, it doesn't mean someone who's 78 years old doesn't need wisdom. Of course they do. But somebody who is younger, a younger believer, usually needs the wisdom of elders more than the older. That's just like it. The second thing is, if you study history, what tends to be true is younger people tend to be more rebellious in their disposition. They're less likely to submit to elders. Again, I'm not saying that's not all like everyone, but for the grouping people together, this is why most protests are younger people, like 20-somethings. That just tends to be the nature. And so he just addresses this, though it is true for all of the congregation. He specifically goes into younger people. Now, if you don't know this, currently there are two men who have been put before the members to be voted on for our congregation on December 6th. I'm not going to say who those men are, but on December 6th, they'll be voted on. And if they are voted in the beginning of the year, they will stand before you as the congregation. And as they stand before you as a congregation, there will be a call and response, which means that you're going to be committing to something. Can I just give you a heads up on one of the parts? There's 7 things that you'll end up committing to or choosing not to commit to. One of the things is, do you commit to obeying the elders of your church, to which blank is now one? And you would need to respond with, we do. And so there's even understanding within Pella to understand that man right there is now an elder. I agree that I will submit. We've talked about the varying things of what submission looks like and what it shouldn't look like in certain situations, but we're using this in the most healthy way possible. I agree to that. Now, so I just want to put that in front of you. Everything that we talked about, there are things that elders need to work through, but that does not remove the role for us as sheep to submit to the elders. Now, in our time to finish, I want to just remind you of Psalm 23. And the reason I want to remind you of Psalm 23 is, in my opinion, Psalm 23 should be the mantra of all elders. Now, of course, in Psalm 23, it is talking about Jesus as the shepherd. Or this is in the Old Testament, obviously, so God as our shepherd. And it's obviously first and foremost God. But if I am an under shepherd, underneath the chief shepherd, I should be trying to do what the chief shepherd wants done and is doing. I want God to use me to pastor his people in that way. And when I read Psalm 23, there are all these beautiful indications of what that can look like. I'll let you, as we're going to in our response time, read Psalm 23. But for now, let me just kind of put in front of you my experience to finish, where I've seen this the most beautiful way possible. There are 2 men in our congregation who are retired pastors. One is Dan Lynn. He's preached here at a couple points, and he pastored a church for some 30 or 40 years in Faith Bible. And I've seen from afar what he's done, and I'm grateful for him, which the merits of his life seem to indicate lived out Psalm 23. But the firsthand experience that I see almost weekly at this point is because of our merger with North Village, the Union of North Village and Pastor Phil. If you don't know Pastor Phil's, North Village is 67 years old, pastored that church for 42 years. And now what we have right now is Pella is a church that is 5 years old with a lot of young people and a lot of young families in our congregation, mixed with a group of people, say 20 to 30 people who, and Pastor Phil and I have talked about this, I recognize that really he continues to kind of be their pastor at the end of their life. But because of this, and my role now and his role before, we do a lot of things together with those people. So when we go to a hospital visit, I'm telling you this, that man has helped keep people from evil. That man has walked people through the valley of the shadow of death. That man has provided space for people to rest when it is needed. A good shepherd emulates these things. And I pray that in 40 years this would be said about me. But here's what's beautiful about that. If you ask Pastor Phil, his motivation, it is over and over, I just want to be like Jesus. Like, Jesus desires these good things for you, and the elder's job is to come alongside and do what Jesus ultimately wants to do in your life, providing rest, fighting on your behalf, providing space so that when you walk in moments of despair, someone is there with you. And I get it. Right now, Pella, we're growing and we're big, and there's only 5 elders, and we're trying to solve that. And I pray, though, at the same time, via us and the deacons, we can still be that for you. But it requires this beautiful relationship. I'm grateful for Pastor Phil emulating our chief shepherd, Jesus, in doing all of that. And I pray that we would feel that and know that to be true. Let's pray.